Hello, and welcome to a special gardener's world. Winter is still with us and no doubt has more to offer, but our gardens are emerging from the cold and the gloom. And the gardening year has well and truly begun. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to celebrate the joy that gardens and gardening can bring by looking back at some of the best seasonal highlights of Gardener's World. On today's programme, Rachel visits the garden of hairstylist to the stars, Sam McKnight, and discovers his love of packing his borders with floral delight.
This is definitely me in plant form, and it gets more and more me as the seasons go on.
It seems like the flowers really are the stars for you.
That's what shouts at me, and that's what I respond to. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's extraordinary.
We travel to Cumbria to meet a young gardener devoted to dahlias.
So this is my allotment. I grow about 300 dahlias every year and about 19 different varieties, and it's looking absolutely fantastic.
Toby meets an inspirational gardener who, over the course of a lifetime, has transformed a farm into an oasis of calm.
Wow, this has a different atmosphere, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. You feel really quite small walking through here, don't you?
And I'll be planting out some of my favourite flowers, heleniums.
I can't wait to see them flower, because these are one of the stars of the late summer border.
As the days lengthen and there's just the occasional touch of heat in the sunshine, every gardener knows that thrill of seeing the garden start to gently unfurl, irresistibly heading towards spring.
Look at you, come on.
However long you garden, this growing, bubbling anticipation is something you never lose. And if Carol's visit to Ordnance House in Wiltshire last May is anything to go by, she certainly agrees.
I love an early summer garden. They make my heart sing. But occasionally, one really stands out. I'm just so excited. This garden just draws you in, it pulls you into its centre. Every vista is just so beautiful, you don't know where to start. And the planting, it's marvellous. I'm going this way first. This is Ordnance House near Salisbury. It started as a blank lawn just over 10 years ago. And now there's a series of glorious areas, all cleverly intertwined. The very first thing you notice in this garden is the structure everywhere. First of all, there are two huge beech trees either end of the garden, but the owners have capitalised on that whole idea of greenery. And everywhere you look, each space is defined by all sorts of evergreens and then beech hedges too. But although the plant range is limited, they're used in so many different ways. There are little box hedges, yes, but the most outstanding thing to my mind is the use of this Portuguese laurel. Not only is it in a traditional hedge across here, but then there are these great lollipops. They create this corner of calm, clean structure, while more ground-level globes flow up the bank behind. And all this geometry, all this symmetry is used to frame the most exuberant planting you ever saw. Many of the paths curve, picking up the circular theme and leading you round the space. But the central bed is one magnificent circle of its own. And under the canopy of these lovely hawthorns, all these plants down here. It's almost like a forest floor. There's a mixture of foxgloves, of alliums, of sweet rockets. They're all attenuated, slightly drawn up because of the lack of light in the centre, mixing and mingling together beautifully. The irises are planted around the edge where they get the benefit of the sunshine. They really need that to do their best. It's positively shimmying in this glorious sort of floral dance. Lots of the beds and borders here. There's a huge diversity of plants. All kind of things mix and mingle with one another. But occasionally, that palette of plants is much more limited, as in this lovely walkway through to the seat. At the moment, there are just 2 or 3 plants which you notice immediately. And the fact that they're used over and over again makes this lovely sort of rhythm right the way through. Here, a Dutch iris called Eye of the Tiger. That's a bulbous plant. Plant it in September or so, and if you've got soil like the soil here, which is really well drained, really sunny, then it should come up year after year after year. And it's paired here with a white version of valerian. This, with these white and green buds, contrasted with that dark, dramatic iris, is just such a beautiful contrast. And since this was introduced by the Romans, I should give it its Latin name. It's Centranthus ruber albus, the white form of this valerian. Once they've finished, then other plants are going to take over. There's lavender right the way down through here, Astrantia stachys with lovely silvery leaves. But as that lavender comes out, so this clematis is going to fill in overhead. Clematis Viticella purpurea plana elegans, which is a mouthful, but so worth it. And this whole picture will be totally different. Well, an equally simple and yet totally inspired planting is this long walkway. It's composed of just 2 plants, a nepeta, this is Walker's Low, a lovely catmint, and with it, in perfect contrast, right across the other side of the colour wheel from this, is this Cicericium with these creamy yellow flowers and these very straight stems. Now, you might think, looking along here, how on earth would I possibly be able to afford to do such a thing in my garden? But it's all been done from scratch. The owner started off with just a couple of plants of the nepeta, and it's the simplest thing in the world to take from cuttings. Just any little basal growths, short lengths, put around the side of a pot of gritty compost, and you can increase your stock exponentially. Lots of this luscious planting was grown from cuttings or division, and they collect their seeds. These foxgloves are all homegrown. There are standalone touches too, like this pyracantha, beautifully brightening up the garage. It's rare to find, but this garden is a perfect combination of structure and plantiness. This pleached hornbeam frames the view of the ornamental garden beyond. And look, the shape of those alliums is reflected in the lollipop trees. Beyond that, those beautiful hedges, and beyond that, the landscape outside and the sky above. It's utterly perfect.
Come on, we're going this way. Come on.
Few plants deliver such rich colour for so long in a summer border as one of my own favourites, heleniums.
No other plant has such a fabulous range of colours within the orange spectrum. And from late July right through into autumn. They add a richness to any border. Absolutely love them. Now I've got a variety here which is very well known, has been grown in gardens for years and years and years, and is one of the best, called Moorheim Beauty. A lovely, rich, orangey red colour. Like all heleniums, it does need some sunshine, so I'm putting this closer to the front of the border than I have done in the past. The thing about heleniums that I've learned is that it's no good planting them in autumn. Give them all summer to grow a good root system, and they are much more likely both to perform well and also to last. I'm planting a group of 3 and I will space these out. Now these will form a solid clump, and if you do have an established clump of heleniums, it's a good idea to divide them every 3 or 4 years, and that will reinvigorate them and also give you fresh plants. If you've got a very light soil, if it's sandy or chalky, beef it up. Add some compost to the soil and then significantly mulch them. Obviously mulch them after you've given them a really good soak. Now they will grow about 3 foot high. You can get some varieties that grow as much as 5 or even 6 foot tall, and also others that are shorter, and I've got one here. Now I've not grown this before, but I'm going to put it right at the front of the border, again to give it maximum sunshine, and it is a variety called Red Jewel. Now Red Jewel only grows to about 2 foot tall, and like all red heleniums, the more sun it gets, the richer its colour will be. There we go. They should start flowering round about the end of July, August, and if you deadhead them, it does increase flowering. Heleniums are a plant that hate drying out. So not only do they need watering when you plant them, but if you have a dry period, if it doesn't rain for 10 days or something, give them a good drink. But I can't wait to see them flower, because these are one of the stars of the late summer border.
Of course, there are many stars of the summer garden. But when we visited a young gardener in Cumbria, there was one flower, for him at least, that stole the show.
I'm Cody and I'm 19 years old and I live at home with my mum, dad and my older brother. When it comes to planting stuff in the garden, it's got to go through me first before it makes it into the garden. This garden means a lot to me because it's the place where my mum and dad let me just go absolutely crazy with planting, and it's just somewhere where you can come and relax and just enjoy and just kind of forget about what's going on in the world. I work at a garden centre. I'm always working with plants, whether or not that's a work aspect or here at home in the garden. I can start and then 6 hours later I realise that it's tea time and I need to go in for my tea. So I've used quite a lot of trees in the garden. I think height is very important because you can always go as high as you wish, but outwards you're a little bit more restricted. So height is always one of those things that you should definitely include in the garden. My dad, he's created his dream pond. It's absolutely huge. It's 8 foot by 8 foot, and it goes down about 5 foot as well. I think water in a garden is just necessary. It just creates a very relaxing atmosphere. So this is an acer I've planted. I planted it here because it also creates a really nice block of greenery here on the edge of the pond, and it also creates quite a lot of nice shadows as well on the water below. The polytunnel's not the the bog standard growing veg and tomatoes and cucumbers. I've just filled it with lots of tropicals. Stuff grows extremely rapid in there. so it's created this really big jungle effect. This is a very small area, but we've really kind of rammed the plants in, and I think that's the best way of making a small space look bigger. I have a few dahlias here in the garden, but I usually have those up at my allotment, which is kind of where I go absolutely crazy with dahlias. And up there is just absolute flower power. It's just colouring. So this is my allotment. I grow about 300 dahlias every year and about 19 different varieties, and it's looking absolutely fantastic. So a couple of years ago, I was at my local flower show and I approached the local hero, Jack Gott, who grows lots of dahlias. And he kind of took me under his wing. He gave me a couple of dahlias one year and I just built up my collection. My allotment's just here, and then just across my shoulder is Jack Gott's allotment. He grows an absolute amazing amount of dahlias, and it's only 2 allotments away from me. I always get advice from him and see what's new and see what dahlias he's growing. So this dahlia here, this is Kilburn Glow. This is an absolutely amazing dahlia. It's only about 3 years old, but it has this most iridescent red colour, and it has these really, really nice kind of yellow specks in the centre of the flower here. These dahlias here, I've done a little bit of an experiment this year, so I've left them all in the ground, and I didn't mulch them, I didn't do anything over winter, and they have just come back up, and they are in their full glory at the moment. The dahlias, they're from Mexico, so they like very free-draining soil. The tuber holds most of the moisture, so you don't have to water them too much. I've not watered them once, and they're still doing absolutely amazing, so it proves that you don't always have to spend hours and hours caring for them. The one thing about dahlias that are amazing is that they carry their flower from around about August time till the end of the year as well, so they'll go straight until the first frost. And they're just such a good doer. So this is a cactus type dahlia, and it's known as Kiwi Gloria. I normally put these into a bouquet just to kind of lower the tone of the bunch with all these very vivid oranges and yellows. So if I was to plant this into the garden, I would put it into more of a sheltered area just to protect it from the rain and the wind, as they do get battered quite easily. I will always have dahlias in my gardens. It's just one plant that I've fallen in love with and I'll always have to grow. I couldn't live without plants. I don't know what I'd do. I absolutely love plants.
When you're growing dahlias, there is one thing I can tell you will definitely help, and that is to deadhead. And if you're not certain about when a flower is spent or when it's a bud, there is actually a rule that helps. You can see here, we have 2 side by side. You have a sort of rounded button, and that is a bud. Next to it is a spent flower, and it's distinctly cone-shaped. And actually, if you press it, very often liquid will come out. And when you deadhead, don't just take the flower head off, but go right down, follow the stem down until you come to the next leaf. Now that means that at the leaf, you'll get side shoots and you'll get 2 more flowers. You keep doing that and that will keep repeating.
We love seeing what you get up to in your own gardens. And last year, we received a lovely film from a viewer whose cottage garden was at its absolute blousy best.
Hi, my name's Michelle. Welcome to Chestnut Cottage in Buckinghamshire. I've lived here for 5 years with my husband, and I'd like to show you around our garden. I want to show you some of my favourite flowers in the garden, and one of them is this white peony, which was here when we first moved in, but after a couple of years it stopped flowering. So I spoke to one of the specialists at the Chelsea Flower Show, and they advised that in the autumn I dig it all up, split the plant in two, and then plant the two separate pieces, which I did. And now, as you can see, there's loads of buds in it and loads of beautiful blooms, and I have a second white peony. My absolute favourite flower in the garden is this coral sunset peony, and I love it because it starts off as a dark magenta pink and fades through different shades of pinks and corals to this green colour, and I love the ombre effect that's created in the petals. And the flower continues to fade to these delicate pinks all the way down to this cream colour. What I love most about it is it creates this beautiful dramatic display of changing colours within the border. Here are some of the other flowers in my garden. There's this splendid rose. There's a little foxglove hiding in behind there. This is a hibiscus which will flower in August. Some of the lupins, which the bees are absolutely loving at the moment. We were also inspired by Adam off Gardener's World last year and made this small pond in our back garden using an old galvanised tub, and then we decided to make a larger pond in our front garden using an old cattle trough, and it helps encourage wildlife into the garden. That's our little video, and I hope you've enjoyed looking around the garden.
The Paradise Garden is now 4 years old from inception, and I think it's found itself. It's a strange thing. When you conceive of an area of a garden or an entire garden, you have a clear idea of what you want and you lay it out. But actually the garden has to find what it wants. And hopefully you meet in the middle and both parties can be satisfied. And it's taken a few years, but I think we're getting there now. We've enlarged this central square and lowered the water, and that gives a better feeling of space, but also the plants, the touches of colour, the intensity of the roses and the touches from the cornflowers, and we've still got some irises going. And that dotting, the intention being like a Persian carpet, is working, I think. I always enjoy coming here now. And actually this is the one part of the garden where I do come and sit occasionally. Not for long, but I sit and I listen to the water, and it's very peaceful. The Paradise Garden is a relatively recent addition to Longmeadow, but last year Toby visited Borough Farm Gardens in Devon, which have taken a lifetime to create.
A week's a long time in gardening. During those 7 days, flowers can open and go over and go to seed. And what about a year? Bare branches of trees can leaf up and fall to the ground, and whole gardens can come to life and then go back into the soil. In a decade, a new border can become long in the tooth. But what about this? Imagine gardening in the same garden for 60 years. Well, I've come here to meet a very special woman who's done just that. Mary Benger and her husband John moved here in 1959 to start a small dairy farm. And while John was busy working the fields, Mary gardened around the house. And as her passion and obsession grew, the boundaries of the garden spread across the farm. The farm is long gone, and today, where cows once grazed, there are 13 acres of beautiful garden. What a remarkable tree.
Yes, isn't it lovely?
Incredible.
This is a native field maple, Acer campestri.
I know it well, but the thing is, I've seen them in North America, acers,
Yes.
and they do this knobbly thing, but I've never seen it on a field maple here.
No.
So what was it like when you first came to this part of the garden?
Well, this is an old Roman clay pit, and it was very full of trees and brambles, nettles. You had to hack your way through, and then you'd see a glimpse of something beautiful like this tree or some ferns and things. And
Wow.
it just struck me that I had to make a garden here. And so that's when I started down here.
And did you tell John?
He was quite happy for me to do this down here because there's no value to the cows or the farm at all. So he said, oh, you can do what you like down there.
Yeah.
But I don't think he really thought I'd spend the next 60 years planting, weeding, gardening. This was the track that led from the field up there down to the cowshed, and they used to come in twice a day for milking.
How did you learn?
Well, my father was a very keen gardener, and I remember my father bought some carnations, and I had a very poor one, and mine grew really well, and I thought, oh, that's marvellous. That's how it's done. This is the Millennium Garden.
Wow.
Obviously, I built this in 1999. Everybody at that time had got millennium fever and trying to think what to do. And on a visit to Chelsea, I put a deposit down on this lead trough here. And it's when you're on the way home on the train and you think, what on earth am I going to do with it? And then gradually I thought, I'll make a whole garden to put it in.
Well, I can see why it caught your eye.
Yes,
But building
lovely.
a garden around a trough is a bit like building a house around a vase.
It is. But that's the way a lot of my gardening has happened, you know.
So 22 years ago, this beautiful garden was farmland.
Absolutely. But I was longing to make a rill somewhere, and then to combine that with the Millennium Trough seemed a good idea.
Well, it looks like it's been here forever. Wow, this has a different atmosphere, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. The whole idea was that when I planted it, you couldn't see out of it. And I think it's worked pretty well, really.
Well, yeah, it's certainly got an intimate feel. And the grasses themselves, what's the story with these?
There was a nursery nearby that was selling up, and it was in the autumn, and most of the good things had gone. And I made an offer for what was left. And it was a mass of grasses.
Yeah. Were the grasses labelled? I hope you don't mind me asking you this.
They were, yes.
Because you've got some tall ones next to the path, some shorter ones
Yes.
behind them. It's a wonderful sort of jamboree, really.
Yes. Well, I particularly wanted some of the tall ones to be next to the path so that you have to go round a corner to see what's round there, really.
I mean, this garden is really tall at the minute, but it's a dynamic one because in winter, it gets chopped right down to the ground.
That's right.
I bet that means you're good with the secateurs.
It would be if I did them as secateurs, but what we do is bring in just a handheld hedge trimmer and then we set fire to them.
How interesting, because I use miscanthus stems to light my barbecue.
Do you?
They burn,
yes,
don't
they
they?
burn really well.
Coming out to the garden every day pretty much for 60 years. I mean, you must get such deep satisfaction from your garden.
Yes.
I mean, do you feel at peace because of it? I mean,
Oh,
what's it give you?
absolutely. There's nothing like going out into a little bit of quiet garden and weeding or planting. And I hope it's a tranquil garden, and I hope that other people get the feeling of tranquility that I have over the years.
I know so well what Mary means by tranquility. You are part of the change and the flow and the creation of the garden, which gives this deep sense of reward and peace. Now, still to come on today's programme. Rachel is immersed in colour as she visits the garden of the celebrity hairstylist Sam McKnight.
When I see this sort of pastel colours, I remember a Chanel show we did with sugary pastel colours like this. All these colours here, we use them as colour references all the time.
We find out how one gardener's obsession with structural plants has shaped his allotment.
Whether it's a problem or not with collecting, I'm not sure yet. I think maybe it's nice in some ways, but one is never enough of something.
It's not only the rich carnival of plants that arrive in the garden each summer at Longmeadow.
Now, I'm out here sowing biennials because the potting shed has temporarily been occupied by a family of swallows. They've been nesting in a tool shed, and now the young have just fledged, just yesterday afternoon. And they're going from nest through the door outside, coming back in, crying to be fed. The whole thing is a whirling mass of birds learning how to cope with the big outside world. So rather than add to their anxiety and get in their way, I'm shifting out their way for a bit. Now, I'm sowing biennials. Now, biennials are those plants which they drop their seed round about May, June, sometimes July. They germinate quickly, develop into young plants, which then go into winter with a decent root system and a foliage system, but no flowers. They either stop growing completely over winter or grow very slowly. But as soon as spring comes, they're in a good position to grow strongly. They will then start flowering, with the first flowering sometime in April and go on into June, and then set seed, which drops, the parent plant dies, but the seed starts that cycle over again. And because they cover 2 years, that's 2 seasons, they're biennial. Now, I've got a few here which are amongst my favourites. We've got Honesty, we've got a wallflower, I've got Primrose Bedder, which is lovely colour, great for the cottage garden. I've got a deep red Fire King, which goes brilliantly with strong tulips for the jewel garden. I've got Sweet Rocket, the Hesperus. I've got some white ones here for the writing garden. And I'll also be sowing foxgloves, which are probably my favourite biennial of all. All of them need to be treated in the same way. So just get normal peat-free potting compost, and I've got some Honesty here, which I'm going to sow. And whatever you're sowing, always try and sow it thinly. Press it very lightly down so there's good contact between the seed and the compost, and then cover them again very lightly. Now, I will water that well and keep it moist, but it doesn't need any extra heat. You certainly don't need a greenhouse for this. If you don't have the space or the setup to grow anything in seed trays or pots, actually biennials are really good if grown in a seed bed. If you've just got a patch of ground the size of this tray, you can make little rows, sow the seed in there, and then when the seedlings appear, you can thin them, grow them on in the soil, and then plant them into their final position in September or October when you have nice, strong little plants.
Of course, you don't need to have years of experience to reap the rewards of gardening. And as a testament to that, we were sent this film from a proud novice gardener.
Hello, I'm Marie-Claude and I live in Manchester in the city centre. I bought this house 4 years ago. The garden was a builder's done. I had never lived in a house, I always lived in flats, so I didn't know what to do with the garden. I asked my husband if he wanted to do some digging. He said yes, okay, so fortunately.
Sometimes I'm raked in as a free labourer, digging and stuff and pruning.
The garden is now full and I still go to garden centres. And when I go there, I always go with the intention of not buying because there is no more room in my garden. But I always come back with little plants, maybe sometimes it's bigger. But this is why this garden is full now. When I designed my garden, I wanted to have islands with different plants in them and pathways. I have grandchildren and I thought that would be nice and playful for them to walk between the plants I'm quite happy with the design. It started 4 years ago on paper and I still have the same design. It's just more full, that's all. I planted some fruit trees and they were that high when I bought them. Look at them now. They are the apples from my apple tree. And I'm going to make a crumble for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed following me in my garden. Gardening has been a pleasure for me and become a passion. And even if you're a beginner like me, you can still enjoy it. So I encourage you to do it. Cheers.
It is amazing to see what can be achieved as a beginner.
Come on.
However, most people start on a slightly smaller scale than Marie Claude. And certainly, growing veg is the perfect introduction to gardening.
The greenhouse has been a complete success. Everything has been a high quality as well as quantity. The tomatoes, for example, have tasted delicious. They've been really good. This is a variety called Brandy Boy, which is a modern one. It's not an heirloom variety, but it is really, really good. You can see that it's got quite a fleshy fruit, but the taste is so good. It's rich, slightly musty, it's sweet, but got a touch of acidity. And it's that combination, which is quite complicated, that makes tomatoes so good. Strip the leaves off as soon as the fruit form, and that means that these green fruit are much more likely to ripen. Can I have the basket? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Right. As well as tomatoes, the chilies have been very good. And the padron have done well. You can see here, these are quite big plants. They do need a regular water supply, but they need good drainage. They don't like to sit in water. So these get watered every day, and we feed these every week, a liquid seaweed feed. And the critical thing is to harvest chilies as soon as they're ripe. They look lovely and decorative when they're on the bush, but once they're ripe, they will inhibit the production of new flowers, and if you don't have new flowers, you won't have new fruit. If you're growing a lot of chilies, you're going to have to cut a lot, but chilies freeze very well, and that means you never have a glut. The crop I'm really interested in is one that I've often had no success with at all, and those are aubergines. You can see that that's a good fruit and ready for the eating. Aubergines, rather like peppers, rather like tomatoes, like light and heat. And the more you can give them, the better. I water them every day. We feed them once a week, just like the chilies, and just let them get on with it. And I've had no problems whatsoever.
Now, I don't think you can beat the taste and satisfaction of homegrown produce picked in season, fresh from the garden or the allotment. But Andy Gladman doesn't grow anything for the plate on his allotment in Leamington Spa.
I think now, looking at the allotment as it is, I think there's something quite special when you're sat in a garden where everything you see around you is because of your work, and you're sort of the master of your own little domain, I suppose. And it's definitely a sense of pride as we sit in the allotment now. As you can see around me, my allotment is completely dedicated to ornamental plants and spiky plants. So it's completely different to what everyone else around me is doing, growing vegetables. So by day, I'm a PhD researcher. So I'm in my final year now, and I've been working on the control of aphids on brassicas. At work, I'm growing brassicas all day. I'm doing lots of trials, testing them, seeing how resistant they are. When I come to my allotment, to be honest, I don't really want to see any brassicas. People in my family have always been fond of growing plants, so I can definitely remember being dragged around the garden centres and the nurseries as a child. I would always be drawn to the cacti and succulents. I think that's often the case with children. They're sort of so unique and so different. That's definitely impacted the plants that I really like to grow now. It's this architectural form, these plants that really stand out. They're almost statuesque in their shapes. There's lots and lots of tall plants here, so this is the third year that I've had the plot now, so the plants have really settled in. We're quite lucky here with the nice stony, loamy soil, so I added a bit of organic matter, and beyond that, the plants just do what they do. I quite like planting taller plants towards the front. I think that gives you a more interesting look, and mixed in with the shrubs, I think it really adds that height, which makes it more interesting. I think I'm just a big fan of the architectural shapes of the plants. I'm always getting in trouble with my partner for putting them too close to the front of the borders, these big spiky plants. I think when you grow such spiky plants, you have to get used to spending an evening pulling some prickles out of your fingers. That's something I spend quite a lot of time doing, but I think it's worthwhile for the plants that I love. This allotment has very much been set up for creating the ideal habitat for the plants, and then the design has come in sort of second to the plants. So these in front of me, these are quite a wonderful plant, which I've recently grown from seed. These are Echinops spinosissimus. So it's a plant that I suspect very few people would recognise, but they're incredibly spiky. I've had people describe them more as a mace in the flower form, either a mace or firework. So this is one of my favourite plants on the allotment. This is Burkheya cercifolia. It's a South African spiky daisy. It has this really spiky architectural foliage. It's definitely not one I think many people would want to put it right at the front of the border, but they're always stunning, and it doesn't matter where you put them, they'll always stand out as some of the feature plants. So this is a really wonderful sea holly. This is Eryngium planum. As you can see, it's absolutely covered in bees, so you have to be careful when you're touching it, but it really stands out in the allotment. I think that there's definitely no doubt that I have whether it's a problem or not with collecting, I'm not sure yet. I think maybe it's nice in some ways, but one is never enough of something. I think with plants, it's a nice thing to be able to collect because you end up with a garden with diversity in the different forms, which I think really adds to the sort of dramatic look of a garden like this. So one of the plant groups that I really love and originally had loads of on the first allotment was red hot pokers. So as I've been growing more of them, I've sort of started to make a bit of a collection now. You have this huge range of red hot pokers that flower sort of June till August. We have one which is Nymphophia painted lady. So this is a nice, really tall red hot poker variety, and you have this nice fade from sort of an orangey red down to a cream. Another nice variety that you can get are smaller American cultivars like Poco Orange. These have been bred to have grassy leaves. I think sometimes when people think of red hot pokers, they think of these really huge, brash, loud, brutish plants. But trying to breed them for the opposite, they're supposed to be more dainty. So I think my first experience with red hot pokers was probably in my nan's garden. I was very drawn to them as a child just because of how different they are, how sort of tactile the flowers are as well, almost that you want to reach out and grab the plants. And when I took on the allotment, I knew that was definitely a type of plant I wanted to try and get as many different ones of as I could, just so that I could enjoy seeing the different flowers throughout the season. One of the groups along with the spiky plants that I really like are thistles, so usually plants in the genus Cirsium. Two nice thistles that I've got here around me. The first one just behind me, this is Cirsium tuberosum. So this is a UK native. It's that classic purple thistle. This is quite a nice tall one, so planted at the front of the border, it's quite sort of airy, you can see through it. This one just in front of me, this is Cirsium oleraceum. This one is native to Central Europe. The flowers, when you look at them, they're much more cream in colour. Still really good for pollinators, and again, nice and tall at the front of a border. In Eastern Europe and China, they actually grow this as an edible crop. So when the plant is quite young, you get this nice rosette of leaves at the bottom, and people actually harvest that as a salad crop. I can't say I've tried it yet, but maybe next year. So I think having an allotment where everyone around me is growing lots of vegetables, the second they find out that I'm researching aphids on brassicas, almost immediately I get the questions of what should I do about aphids on my plants. I think the best advice I usually give is immediately rubbing off the aphids. You're causing a stress response in the aphids around them. This is releasing a chemical called aphid alarm pheromone, and it's the release of that actually has been proven to attract in predators and parasitoids from nearby plants. I think when I took on the allotment I had in this mind, it was almost like a practice garden for maybe a future house. So perhaps I got a bit carried away with my practice, but I can't imagine my life without a lot of these plants now. So I think that in some way or form, these plants are always going to be with me, and there's probably going to be new ones along the way that will get added to the collection of collections. But I think that's probably a nice thing, if anything else.
It's quite unusual to see an allotment devoted solely to flowers, and in fact Andy had to have special permission to do that, but I thought it looked great.
Colour and structure are key in any planting scheme, and late spring brings one of my favourite, if fleeting, combinations.
Although of course the dual garden is completely dominated by this extraordinary bobbly wave of purple from the allium purple sensation. It actually looks its best now because there's enough else going on to set it into context, whether it be the lovely silvery glaucous leaves of the cardoon or the bright spots of vermilion from the geum, the touches of mauve blue from the Iris sibirica, the golden of the hop. All these things are acting as a foil for the alliums. And it only lasts for a day or two, but every year I love it more and more. It's just one of those highlights of the year, and it's very, very temporary too. In a week or so, the alliums will just be seed heads, and we will have moved on to another season. Now it's time to visit one of your gardens, and we're going to Lancashire, to Chorley, and the garden of Helen Winstanley.
Hello, I'm Helen, and I'd like to welcome you to my front garden. As you can see, it's quite small, but it's full of roses. My love for gardening, I think, comes from my parents. Both my parents are very good gardeners, but it's my mother who loved the roses. From when I was a very young girl, she used to take me into the garden, show me her favourite roses, tell me all about the difference between hybrid teas and floribundas. It only became natural to me when I came to grow my own garden. The first flower I went to was the rose. All I do with this garden is, come January, February, I give them all a really good prune, as far down as they'll go, leave them to it until about March. I get a good rose fertiliser, give a good sprinkle on the surface of the soil, and then give it a good 2-3 inches mulch of a good, well-rotted manure. And then just leave them to get on with it. And then when they start flowering, the only thing you have to do after that is to give them a dead head every now and then, as often as you possibly can, just to help to keep the rose flowering. You could stand here right now, you'd wish you could smell what I can smell. It's absolutely heavenly. Going from purples from the Rhapsody and blues to the yellows of Pilgrim. I hope you agree this front garden, I think, is quite spectacular, which just shows what you can do with a front garden these days. You don't have to pave them over. You can actually create something really special. I'm very, very proud of it, and hopefully you've enjoyed looking at it. Thank you very much.
By June, the shrub roses in the cottage garden are at their very best, along with the rambling roses in the orchard.
It's impossible to choose a favourite rose. There are so many that are wonderful. I tend to say whichever one I'm nearest to at the moment. OK, but right now, this one can be my favourite rose. It is Felicite Perpetuae, and it's completely wonderful. It's got these little pink buds that open out into ruffled pom-poms of white flower, a mass of them, that started about a week ago and will continue for maybe another 10 days if I'm lucky. So a maximum of 3 weeks of glory, and that's it. That's its performance for the year. And the fact that it's limited actually makes it more precious to me. Now, this is a classic rambler rose. Ramblers tend to have a mass of smaller flowers. Most of them only flower once in midsummer, and they flower on the previous year's growth. So, for example, this shoot here will bear flowers next year, but there are none on it now. This is a new growth, whereas all these flowers are produced on shoots that grew last summer. Whereas climbers form their flowers on new growth, which means that you can prune climbers quite happily as late as March, and they will flower perfectly well that summer. Whereas ramblers should be pruned immediately after flowering, any time from July to August, depending which rambler it is. Now, there is one burning question I know you're all asking. Does your hair influence your garden, or your garden influence your hair? Well, last summer, Rachel went to visit a man who certainly knows the answer.
You might not know Sam McKnight, but you'll certainly recognise his clients. He's a renowned hairstylist for glossy magazine photo shoots and catwalk shows, known for his work with Kate Moss, Tilda Swinton and Diana, Princess of Wales. Constantly travelling the world, this city garden has become his place of sanctuary. So where has the inspiration come from for all of this? How did it start?
I never really had a desire to have my own garden until about early 2000s, when I used to live not too far from Regent's Park. And I used to spend a lot of sunny afternoons renting a deck chair, reading a book in the Queen Mary Rose Garden. So that started me thinking about maybe getting an outside space of my own, because I'd always lived in a block of flats before. I somehow found myself visiting Sissinghurst. I think we may have done a shoot there or something, and I got absolutely blown away by that. And then discovered Great Dixter, then discovered Hidcote, then discovered all the sort of great gardens, and then started to be really curious about their planting, especially Dixter with its organised chaos, which I like to call it, which is very similar to my work, actually. So the connection was there from the beginning, really.
After finding this garden and its house, Sam set about creating his colour-filled dream garden. It has a figure-of-8 structure, bordered by narrow tree-lined paths. The first loop has borders and beds packed with billowing bright perennials and shrubs. Hidden by a quince tree is the second loop, filled with bold and delicious dahlias and some very traditional roses. And it's the flowers and colour that seems to have driven the evolution of this garden.
This is definitely me in plant form, and it gets more and more me as the seasons go on.
It seems to me that you're a flower man, and those are the things that catch your eye. Would that be right?
The flowers, the shape and the colour, I mean, look at that. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Oh,
it's
so
fantastic.
beautiful.
It's about having that colour.
That's what speaks to you.
That's what shouts at me, and that's what I respond to.
It's just gorgeous, you know, the verbena through the dahlias, through the cosmos, I mean, and the zinnias. Everything just fits together without looking contrived. Sam wants colour all year round. Zingy pots frame the front of the garden, leading to waves of softer shades. And I suspect his skill at blending colours and shapes speaks to his years crafting extravagant, colourful hairstyles. How much would you say that the garden and the plants that you put into it are inspired by the work that you do?
Oh, quite a lot. And when I see this sort of pastel colours, I remember a Chanel show we did with sugary pastel colours like this. All these colours here are such, and I'm taking pictures all the time, so we use them as in colour references all the time.
I have a 16-year-old at the moment with them who's using every colour in the book. So she's going from mauve to pink to
absolutely.
dark blue.
And a mix of all those colours, you know, not just, it's never, because it's never, if you look at that, it's not just one colour. It's slightly tinted brown on the edges, and it goes from a grey to a lilac to quite a deep purple. There's never just one colour, and hair is like that too. There's a depth to everything.
The symbiotic relationship between Sam's work and his gardening has led to some colourful plant choices further into the garden. Look at that dahlia.
Beautiful.
That's a stunner.
Yeah, she's called Myrtle's Folly. Look at the size of that on my hand.
I'm coveting that, rather.
Yeah.
Might go on my list at home. Beautiful. And then just so many lovely dahlias as you go around this section. Do you have favourites, or do they sort of come and go in your affections?
I think for me, there's a mixture of the sort of bold and blousy and the Technicolor and the really sort of structured pom-pom dahlias like that.
That's beautiful.
So I think having the mixture is really good. And I always shove a few sunflowers in there. And this year I've got a mix between Velvet Queen and Black Magic, because there's something really rich and romantic about the dark ones.
Yes. What is so beautiful about Sam's garden is that it is uniquely him. We're just a couple of miles from the centre of London, and yet you feel like you're in a really rural, sort of very calming environment. It's beautiful. And the other thing is his eye for colour, which I think is second to none. You can see here just the way that he groups these colours together. They're not necessarily things that you would think might go together. And texture as well here. Look at this froth of cosmos foliage, with the verbenas, the dahlias, everything else just popping up through. And in fact, if he was inspired by Dixter, I think this is where it really shows, in these ranks of pots just either side of the terrace here. You get the sense that nothing escapes him. He sees every single detail, and it shows. What would you say that you were aiming for with the garden in terms of how people might respond to it?
Well, because it's such a meditative place for me, I hope it's really peaceful, which I think it is. And everyone who comes here, it brings them great joy. And I think joy is a word I use all the time, because it's just joyful. I want it to be joyful. I want it to feel joyful. And I think that's probably the word I would use. Joy, pure and simple.
I agree. I think that's spot on. I do feel peaceful, and it's brought me enormous joy visiting.
Thank you.
If you can create joy for yourself and everybody who comes to your garden, that is the definition of a good gardener. Well, that's it for today. Time to take the dogs for a walk.
But we've got lots more Gardener's World to celebrate. So join us again next week. Until then, bye-bye.
Okay. Go on then. Go on. Off you go.